Hello friends, today we're looking at two new all-foam paddles that hit just about as hard as the rules allow, and both are under $200. That's a big deal when you consider that elite tier power paddles have been sitting right around the $300 mark until very recently. Now with max power paddles, there are always trade-offs like durability or just how long they will stay certified in this fast-changing regulatory world. So we'll get into those concerns just a little later. This review is mostly based on performance data and paddle construction since I haven't been able to play recently due to injury, and thankfully Eddie stepped in to test these on court and gave me his take. Quick heads up, Body Helix and GRUVN sent me these paddles for testing, no strings attached. They didn't pay me, they didn't influence this review, and they didn't see it before it went live. If you use my affiliate code to pick one up, you can get a discount and I get a small commission, which helps this channel keep going. Both paddles are priced under $200. Before using my code, the Body Helix Flik F1 comes in at $190, and the GRUVN LAZR full foam is $179. You can knock 10% off either one with the code Johnkew. So I'll put the specs and dimensions on screen now, and the Flik F1 is an elongated shape with a 5.25-inch handle, and the GRUVN LAZR has a hybrid shape and a slightly longer 5.5-inch handle. We'll talk more about weighting and balance in just a bit. So let's start with the Body Helix Flik F1, and here's what the X-ray looks like. You can clearly see it's an all-foam core with 95 small holes through the center. There's also an edge foam that wraps all the way around the paddle and square patches of fiberglass in the center. And when I opened it up, everything matched the X-ray. And first off, credit to Body Helix for using a fully molded polyurethane handle. That's the level of quality we should expect from performance paddles. Looking at the cross-section, you can see the black EPP foam, expanded polypropylene foam core with all those molded holes and a yellowish edge foam band that extends from the perimeter right into the handle. If you look through those holes toward the opposite face, you'll notice there's a generous amount of epoxy bonding the face layers to the core, and it's strong. You'll see me struggling here with a knife trying to dig down into the lower fiberglass patch. I eventually had to sand through the foam to get there. Under a microscope, here's what that bottom fiberglass patch looks like. It appears to be unidirectional fiberglass, and you can see these translucent threads running in one direction. On a profile cut under the microscope, you'll see 4 layers total. 3 layers of unidirectional carbon fiber on top and 1 layer of fiberglass on the bottom. That fiberglass activation layer is likely there to add a bit of spring on bigger hits when the ball really sinks into the paddle. And now let's look at the GRUVN LAZR solid foam. The X-ray tells a different story for this one. There are no holes in the core, but you can see diagonal lines running across the foam. Like the Flik, there's edge foam around the perimeter and down into the handle, but here, instead of foam continuing into the handle, GRUVN used honeycomb polypropylene, probably to help keep the weight down. So once I started on the dissection, I did wish they'd used PU pallets in the handle instead of this EVA soft foam, and when I split the paddle open with a plan view cut, I was surprised to find 2 different types of foam inside, so black and white. So it took me a second, but I did realize that the core is built in 3 layers, so black foam under each face with a white foam layer in the middle. This becomes much clearer in the cross-section. Now, those diagonal lines from the X-ray, I still couldn't find them, so I removed the face sheet. Unlike the Flik, the face layup here came off surprisingly easy. I just needed to slip a knife under it and then peeled it off with a bit of encouragement from a pry bar. Looking at the top layer of foam underneath, there's still no sign of the X-ray linear pattern. I kept peeling back layers, hoping to find what made those diagonal lines, and my best guess is that the white foam is made with sort of these bonded panels, and these seams do show up under an X-ray, but for some reason I couldn't find them with the angles I was using in the dissection. Now that white foam is really interesting though. That black stuff is your standard EPP, but the white foam, it's totally different. Under a microscope, you can see it's open cell, so more sponge-like than the closed cell structure of the EPP. It also feels stiffer than the black foam, which might explain GRUVN's slightly firmer feel on contact. And here's the surface layup under the microscope. On top, you've got a blue Kevlar carbon fiber weave with 2 unidirectional carbon fiber layers underneath. So let's move on to how these paddles actually perform. I'll start with the radar gun results and show you the full breakdown, so spin, power, pop, maneuverability, and sweet spot. Up top on the screen, you'll see the raw numbers, and below that is a radar chart showing how these paddles rank compared to over 300 other paddles in my database. And here's how to read the chart. The left side is firepower, so power and pop. The top right is control and forgiveness, and the bottom is hand speed and maneuverability. So let's start with the Body Helix Flik F1. The radar chart is very clear on this. This paddle is nearly maxed out on power, pop, and spin. Everything else, the other metrics, are much lower. So this is the classic fingerprint of an elite tier power paddle. And the only real drawback here is its lower twist weight, which I'll talk more about in the mods section. Now, here's the GRUVN LAZR 16 HD solid foam. It's just a notch below the Flik in terms of power and pop, and has slightly less spin, but hand speed is about the same, and the twist weight is much better, which generally means a larger and more forgiving sweet spot. And just a reminder, if you want to explore these radar charts with an interactive dashboard for other paddles, you can check them out on my website at JohnKewPickleball.com or follow the link in the description. So next, I tested both paddles with my ball cannon to measure KewCOR. It's my own version of the USAP PBCOR rating, or what UPAA calls PEF. Basically, it tells you how much energy the paddle gives back to the ball. In other words, a firepower score. And here's what I got. The Body Helix Flik F1 came in at 0.450 and the GRUVN LAZR at 0.420. On screen, you'll see where those scores land compared to other paddles I've tested. The GRUVN sits at the upper end of the power category, similar to paddles like the Paddletech Bantam AC 12.7 and the Rhombus Ripple V2. But the Body Helix, that one's way up there, right near the legal limit. Now, to be clear, I'm not in the business of paddle regulation, and my methods are slightly different from what USAP uses, but based on my results, the Flik F1 is closer to paddles that have failed PBCOR rather than to those that have passed. So because of my injury, I haven't been able to spend much time with these paddles on court, but based on my limited testing and all the performance metrics we just looked at, my early impressions line up with what the numbers are telling us. Both of these paddles are elite tier power paddles. The GRUVN is just a tick below the Body Helix in terms of pure firepower, but it still packs a serious punch. And the Flik F1, that's right up there against the legal limit. It actually felt just a little bit hotter than the Rhombus Ripple V2, which is already near the top of the power category. Now, beyond the firepower, both of these paddles have that soft, solid, all-foam feel. The Flik F1 feels smooth and buttery and very plush, and the GRUVN LAZR is slightly firmer and denser, but it still clearly plays like a foam paddle. I'd say the Flik's sweet spot felt pretty generous, but it does benefit from some perimeter weighting. So I added 4 grams of tungsten to the neck and the cheeks of the paddle, and that broadened the sweet spot nicely, and it only raised the swing weight by about 3 to 4 points. The GRUVN LAZR's sweet spot does feel a little bit smaller than the Flik, but I think that's because it has a more concentrated hot spot in the center, and the response drops off outside of that area compared to the Flik. But it still feels good, I'd say, across the entire face, and it doesn't give you those sort of harsh, buzzy vibrations you get with some paddles when you miss the center. I also added some tungsten to the GRUVN, so 3 grams on each side at 8 and 4 o'clock. That helped soften up the hot spot a bit, and again, only added 3 grams of swing weight. Now, speaking personally, I think both of these paddles are just too powerful for my game. If I were playing a tournament and my nerves were high and I was a little stiff, and sometimes that control matters a little bit more than power, I'd probably struggle to keep balls low and out of pop-up territory. And I don't think that I'm alone in this. I'm pretty sure that a lot of players will have a hard time managing this much power. I also got Eddie's on-court impressions for both paddles. Now, I know most of you already know Eddie, but for those of you who don't, he's my podcast co-host.
Hey, it's Eddie here. I've been playing with these 2 paddles for a little bit now, the Body Helix Flik and the GRUVN LAZR. All foam paddles, but they play a little bit differently. The Body Helix is a little bit softer feeling, I would say, a little bit more dwell time. The GRUVN's super powerful, just like the Body Helix, but it's got a different feel. It's more stable, I would say, a firmer feel, I need to spend some more time with the GRUVN because it has some hot spots and some cold spots that I need to figure out. It's the sweet spot is inconsistent, I would say, compared to other paddles in its class. So we'll spend some more time on it and report back. Thanks.
So let's talk about a few concerns I have, different ones for each paddle. Starting with the Body Helix Flik F1. Now, I'm a little worried that once this paddle hits the streets that it may draw some attention from USAP because of how powerful this paddle is. It's riding right up against the legal limit, and if it gets popular, it could be retested. And if it fails, that would lead to delisting and sunsetting, basically a big headache for players and an even bigger headache for Body Helix. Now, Body Helix is a smaller company that does a lot of good things for pickleball, and a delisting, I'm worried, would hit them harder than most other companies. Now, in a slightly separate issue, in terms of whether or not this level of power is good for pickleball, I'm actually less concerned about the Body Helix paddle than I was about something like the Yola Mod TA15. Why? Because the mod just kept getting hotter and hotter as you played with it. Its power increased with use. But the Flik F1, on the other hand, will probably stay fairly consistent over time, judging from the performance history of other paddles with EPP cores. So to draw a comparison, here's a side-by-side of the KewCOR scores of the Flik 1 down there versus a lightly used mod way up high in the red zone. You can clearly see the difference. And now over to the GRUVN LAZR. My concern here is more related to durability. So let me take you back to earlier this year for a second when Carbon released the first, I'd say, great performing all foam paddle. I said at that time that the main risk with this design would be disbonding. Foam is just a tough material to bond to, and if the surface layers start separating from the core, then that is a real problem. Now, to be fair, most of the foam paddles that we've seen, including Carbon, have held up very well. But recently, Vatic had to cancel the launch of their V-Core foam paddles because they were disbonding when exposed to heat, something we discovered when the paddles were placed out in direct sunlight on a hot day. Now, the GRUVN LAZR has a more complex tri-level core. During the dissection, the face layers came off of the core a little too easy for my liking. And that makes me think that it might be a little more prone to disbonding than some of the others. That said, I did put both the GRUVN and the Body Helix through the same torture test that wrecked the Vatic V-Cores, over 2 hours in direct sunlight on a 95-degree day. And neither of them showed any damage. So while I still have some concerns, they did hold up very impressively to that test. So if you're willing to look past the concerns I just mentioned, both of these paddles offer elite tier power at a price that's way more approachable than the $300 norm. With my code Johnkew, the Body Helix Flik F1 drops to $171 and the GRUVN LAZR full foam comes down to $161. Now, one important heads up about the GRUVN LAZR, it was PB-Core certified at 0.44, and under USAP rules, this is the legal limit this year, but the limit will be reduced to 0.43 in 2026. So the GRUVN LAZR will be sunset for sanctioned play starting May 1st, 2026. Now, to address that, GRUVN is offering a very generous deal. If you do buy a LAZR full foam right now, they'll give you a 70% discount off any other GRUVN paddle before that May 1st, 2026 deadline. Their plan is to get a new version of that paddle certified at 0.43 along with some other shapes and models. So yeah, these are very solid options for anyone chasing that max power without maxing out the credit card. Now, that being said, I personally find both of these paddles to have a little bit too much firepower for my own tastes, especially during tournament play, and I know that I'd have a hard time keeping things under control, especially with the Flik F1, which has just a ton of pop in particular. But I really appreciate what both companies are doing. Body Helix and GRUVN are both pushing performance forward and making it more accessible. That's good for players and it's good for the sport. All right, that's it for this one. As always, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video.